Hello, students. Today we're going to be talking about nonverbal communication, and this is in Chapter 6 of your textbook. This is potentially my favorite topic in the entire universe of all communication. I think it's so much fun, and I really love how diverse it is. As a communication instructor, I'm expected to love all forms of communication, and I do. But for me, nonverbal communication truly takes the cake because, like your textbook will describe for you, this is how the majority of meaning is created. At the beginning of the semester, I talked about how meaning is co-created, which means I send out a message to you with my intent, and then you, or whoever's listening to me, ascribes to that message whatever they think it means, and together we come up with this jumbled up mess of what we think was said. And this is where a lot of confusion comes into communication, because of course we misinterpret things all the time. The way that we would clarify things would be through nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is anything that is not words. Your textbook defines it as communicating by non-linguistic means. Non-linguistic just simply means not spoken words. Now it can be your voice, it can be your body language, it could be hand gestures, your eyebrows, it's anything that's not verbal, so non-words. So keep that definition in mind because a lot of people think that nonverbal communication is everything the body and nothing the voice. But it is a specific type of vocal communication. The majority of what people are looking for in the meaning of what it is you're saying aren't in the words themselves. And there's a lot of research out there that backs this up. Approximately 7% of what people are looking for in the meaning of what it is you're saying are in the words themselves. 38% is the tone of how you're saying something, and 55% is your body language. That is the majority of what people are looking for in the meaning of what it is you're saying. The reason why I have this iceberg up here is because, as you can see, the majority of its mass is beneath the surface of the water, and the same thing is true in communication. The majority of what people are looking for, again, in the meaning of what it is you're saying, is below the surface of the words being used. Nonverbal communication is always occurring. It's unconscious, it's usually relational, and it's inherently ambiguous. I talked about ambiguity in Chapter 5, which means that it has multiple meanings, and we make a lot of inferences when things are not spoken. We also talked about perception checking in Chapter 4. If we make an assumption about someone else's nonverbal communication, we need to take a few minutes and ask them what they mean or make sure that it's nothing that you're taking an offense to. Sometimes nonverbal is rooted in biology. Sometimes it's just a nervous tic. And any of these things are rooted in our nonverbal communication. Finally, nonverbal is multi-channeled, which simply means that it comes through multiple communication channels that are not oral. For example, if we're tired, we yawn. We may stretch or cock our head to side as we're trying to wake ourselves up. So there's many different ways that nonverbal communication is continuously occurring. Nonverbal communication is primarily relational. When we talk about nonverbal communication being primarily relational, we're discussing the ways we illustrate our interpersonal relationships with others physically. If we're hugging or holding hands, that might mean that we're close to a person, whether it's a family member or a significant other. If we're shaking hands, we're sometimes sealing a business deal or showing a sign of respect. If I see someone across the room, it might mean that I need to wave to someone or give them a head nod. These are all different ways that we communicate informally. Proximity is also another way that we illustrate relational nonverbal communication. Proximity simply means the space between us. Some of us are very comfortable sitting very close to people, whether we know them or not. Some of us aren't that comfortable sitting next to someone that we don't know very well. Like when you enter a room and you don't know very many people in the room, very rarely do we sit right next to someone that we don't know. Nonverbal communication is ambiguous. If you ever sit and people watch, we can make a lot of assumptions and inferences about other people's nonverbal behavior, but that doesn't mean that our inferences are always correct. Just like we talked about language being subjective, well, our nonverbal is equally subjective. We're making these perceptions and these assumptions through our own unique world lenses. For example, if you see this picture of a guy pinching the bridge of his nose on my slide, well, maybe he's doing that because he's tired. Maybe he's frustrated. We don't know if he's frustrated at himself or frustrated at someone else. We don't even know if he's frustrated at all. Maybe his glasses are just too heavy and he's just pinching the bridge of his nose to give himself a little bit of relief. So there's many different ways that we can understand the meaning behind nonverbal communication. And it doesn't mean that any of my assumptions are right. Nonverbal communication occurs in mediated messages. So again, things like text messages, instant messages, email, TikTok, snap filters, or any of the ways that we communicate without verbal utterances. When we're typing words, those obviously have a meaning based on our language. But ask yourself, are you using emojis? Are you using punctuation? Are you using all caps? Usually, when you use all caps, people consider that to be yelling. So these are all examples of how we use nonverbal communication in our texting or email to add additional meaning to the messages. Timeliness of response. If you have that friend that always replies right away, or you know that they always have their phone on them, maybe if they don't text you back right away, you might feel that they're mad at you, or maybe you start to worry about them if no one's heard from them lately. So all of these nonverbal communication cues add additional meaning. Nonverbal communication is influenced by culture. Our textbook uses the word emblems, and these are culturally understood substitutes for verbal expression. Holding up one finger in the United States says you're number one. I use this to indicate just 1 second. If I'm discussing something with a student or wrapping up an email or if I'm on the phone, I'm a just 1 second kind of a guy. In some cultures, this can be perceived as being very rude. In the United States, giving someone a thumbs up sign can mean a good job. In Germany, it means you're number 5. And in other cultures, it can be a rude reference. A shrug can indicate uncertainty or I don't know, but in other cultures, it could mean yes. So think about the ways that you use your body or your hand gestures to communicate a cultural emblem. Some functions of nonverbal communication are creating and maintaining relationships. Regulators are cues that help control verbal interaction. Our textbook talks about different ways that we use intonation in our language to communicate different cues within our conversation. For example, if I change my vocal intonation, maybe I change my pitch in between sentences, that might be signaling that I'm about to ask you a question. We could also draw out the last syllable to end a sentence or end a statement. We can use it to cue someone, letting them know that it's their turn to talk. We also drop vocal pitch when using certain expressions. Like when people say, we sometimes drop our tone when we slip those in because it's not necessarily supposed to be part of a sentence and not really part of our thoughts. It's an utterance that we just slip into our conversation. So this is all part of our nonverbal radar. It's our regulator that changes how our intonation is affecting our communication. We also influence others in our maintenance of our relationships. We can adopt our poses like spreading out our arms to create a sense of power. Sometimes this is done deliberately, but it can also be done unintentionally. These are just the ways that we try to persuade others, whether it's to satisfy a need or a desire that we have, to try to get them to accomplish a task. These are just different ways that we can use nonverbal communication. Our textbook also uses the example of jumping for joy. Just sitting up straight can improve your self-esteem or your body language. Changing your posture can help improve your body language. Also, just doing things like smiling, frowning, or scowling at others, these are going to influence both ourselves and others' behavior. We talked a lot in previous chapters about lying being a part of healthy communication, whether it's our own self-perception or how we want to perceive others or how we want to influence others. It's important to realize, again, that not all self-deception is self-serving or malicious. Deceptions are used as a way to save face or soften the blow of information. Really interestingly, the research in our textbook discusses that we are accurate at detecting deceptions only about half the time. That means that 50% of the time, we don't pick up on the fact that people are being less than honest with us. We tend to overestimate our ability to detect other people's lies and have a strong tendency to judge others' messages as truthful, which means that we tend to believe people whether they're being honest or not. We also consider that people who don't maintain eye contact or possibly fidget to be liars. But the truth is that liars sustain more direct eye contact and fidget less. They tend to convey more confidence and in that confidence in their body language, and that's one of the reasons why they're easily deceptive. We talk a lot about managing impressions when we discussed verbal communication earlier in our textbook. But here we're going to talk about nonverbal impression management. This includes our physical manners, our appearance, and the things that we surround ourselves with. The way we stand, move, control our facial expressions, or adjust our voices, these are all part of our mannerisms. If you have a very strong voice or are very assertive, people may think that you're confident, that you're strong, or you may have good posture. These all lead into the ways that people perceive you. Our appearance influences other people's impressions as well. So the way we dress, groom ourselves, how often or little we shower, whether or not we use cologne or perfume, these are all part of how we present ourselves to the outside world through our appearance. Whether we wear clean jeans or we wear jeans with holes in them, button-up t-shirts or a dirty t-shirt, all of these things are parts of the way people use our nonverbal communication to read us. And finally, our setting. The physical items we surround ourselves with can be things like our cars, our furniture, our homes, or our utilities. And when I say utilities, I'm thinking about things like your bag or your purse, your gear. Are you wearing something shiny or something old and battered? What we really want to take away from all these things is how people use our manner, appearance, and settings to judge us. How do they manage our impressions, and how do they perceive these things? Some of you may say things like, I don't really care. Many people in college wear jeans and t-shirts, and we don't really care how other people feel about the way we dress. Sometimes we drive an old pickup truck, and we're okay with that because we can't afford a new car, and the old pickup truck just gets us from point A to point B. Other people may feel they need to have a flashier car or a newer model. So these are all different things that illustrate who we are on a nonverbal level. In addition to our nonverbal surroundings, we also have to be aware of our body movements, or our kinesics, is a study of how people communicate through body movement. It's all about movement and gestures, and this includes facial expressions. Your textbook mentions that there are almost 28,000 different facial expressions that we can create. We do have a lot of facial expressions, and I'm not going to go into all those, but it's important to think about how you use your face, how you use your eyebrows, your frowns, whether or not you're furrowing your brow, how you smile, how you wave at people, how you signal someone for help. It could also be things like dancing. It could even be yoga. It's your movement and how your movement impacts your communication. Think about how you move when you communicate. When we're out with our friends, typically we get more animated. When we're at home, curled up with a book or watching TV, there's not a whole lot of kinesic activity. When you are presenting in front of the class, you do have to push kinesics more than what you are comfortable with doing in front of an audience. You have to speak with authority, and the best way to do that is think about how you use your body and your hands effectively. Generally speaking, females are more expressive than males. Men typically have their arms crossed or they put their hands in their pockets. Females tend to stand a little bit closer and be more animated with their body language. And again, these are generalizations, not rules. Oculesics is a study of eye communication. I'm going to play this video for you. It's the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, but I'm going to put it on mute. I really love this YouTube channel because this guy just straight up makes up words. So if you ever want to kill a couple of minutes on YouTube, check it out. It's really fun, but I'm going to put it on mute. But again, oculesics is a study of how eyes communicate. This includes things like our gaze, our stare, our glare, or even if we're avoiding eye contact. A lot of the communication that we do is through our eyes. And of course, our meaning is also mirrored through our culture. In America, it's usually important to have direct eye contact, especially if you're going on a job interview or you're in a professional work environment. Eye contact is that important piece of nonverbal communication, but like I've discussed in other chapters in other cultures, it's important not to have direct eye contact because it can be perceived as rude. Sometimes people feel that you're so busy looking at them that you're not actually listening. So culturally, it's more acceptable to lower your gaze as a sign that you're listening and paying more attention in certain cultures. So think about how you use your eyes when you communicate. How long and how often do you make eye contact with someone else? For example, if we were actually in class and I was giving my lecture and I'm just up there lecturing away, and then I suddenly lock eyes with one person. Let's say I lock eyes with you and only you, and I don't look away. Think about how many seconds it would take before you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Or would you even feel uncomfortable at all, or would you see it as a challenge? Would you be like, okay, come on, Professor Navarro, let's bring it on, let's have a staring contest? What would you do? So we do kind of diversify when we respond to eye communication. I love eye communication, but like I mentioned earlier, it can be extremely threatening. If you want to win an argument, try to lock eyes with someone and smile at them. If you do that, they will eventually get a little bit freaked out and they will eventually stop arguing with you because it's very uncomfortable. Normally, typically, people have a rise in aggression when I do this because they're trying to scare you, and eventually they deflate because I'm kind of weirding them out with that level of eye communication with an additional smile. We use eye communication to signify a lot of things, obviously. It could be that we're interested or that we're disinterested. If you ever had a fight with someone and you've ever been in the wrong, what do you normally do with eye contact? I remember as a teenager, if I ever had a fight with my parents, I wasn't making a whole lot of eye contact with anyone, and that's typical whenever we don't want to connect. Remember, eye contact is also a sign of aggression among animals, especially dogs. If you have a dog and you've ever yelled at it, it kind of looks away for a bit, they are using oculesics as well. Oculesics is useful for job interviews. If you want to do well in a job interview, a really good thing to do is to make strong eye contact with your interviewer. I got a job as a teenager because I gave really good eye contact, and it was this group interview, and the interviewer said that I was the only person who made eye contact with him throughout the entire interview, and he figured that would be a good thing because the job that I was interviewing for was in sales, so he thought that eye communication was very important for a sales job. If you're not a fan of eye contact, my advice is for you to get more familiar with it because it is something that you're going to have to use in life. Haptics is a study of touching. This is whenever our body comes into contact with another person's body, and haptic communication is very easy to think about. When you come into contact with someone, what do? You give them a hug? Do you give them a high five, handshake, fist bump? Whatever it is you do to come into physical contact with someone else is haptic communication. And for some people, haptic communication is just not their thing. Some people just don't like to be touched. And I think a lot of people are going to feel much more uncomfortable being touched with the whole COVID crisis. But haptics is also very useful because it shows what our voices can't show. For example, you might be walking down the sidewalk on the beach and you see a really attractive person. If you're walking with a friend, you might just give them a little elbow bump and say, hey, look, 3 o'clock, there's a hot person coming our way. Haptics meets a primal human need. Touch can really help improve self-disclosure personally and in doctor-patient relationships. Our textbook also points out that waitresses that tend to touch their patrons in an innocent way, but if they find ways to innocently touch their patrons, then they can get higher tips. Personally, I think this might have very different outcomes depending on your gender, because I remember hearing something like this when I was a waiter, that if you find ways to touch your customers, then you may get higher tips. And I got to tell you, sometimes that didn't always work out for me. So it's kind of a mixed bag, so just be careful. I'm not telling you to go touch everyone right now. But we do have an innate need to be touched, whether it's strictly for communication or reassurance purposes. When you hold someone's hand or give them a high five for a good job. And to different degrees, we all want to be touched on some level. Next we have vocalics, which is also known as paralanguage. Paralanguage is the way we use words. Paralanguage also describes the way a message is spoken. So please don't be thrown off from a test question in your very near future if it asks you what the definition of paralanguage is. It's the same thing as vocalics, but alternating communication textbooks do have very diverse definitions of what vocalics is. So vocalics and paralanguage are the same thing. As you might have guessed, this is the nonverbal communication category that involves your voice. This is the type that most people tend to forget about. It is still a part of nonverbal communication because how you use your voice changes, and the way you change your voice does bring additional meaning to that message. This includes our tone, which is how we say things. Are you someone who speaks with authority, or do you say things really timidly and quietly? Think about if you convey a mean tone of voice or a friendly tone of voice. The rate is the speed at which you say something. If you're angry or nervous, you might say something really, really quickly. But if you're thinking through something, you might speak a little bit more slowly. Tempo is the emphasis you put on certain words. When you speak, there are natural words that we emphasize in our language. Take, for example, the sentence that I have up on the slide, I can't tell you not to go. And I want you to see how the meaning of this sentence changes depending on what word I emphasize. Let's say I'm emphasizing the word can't. I can't tell you not to go. Or if I'm emphasizing the word go, I can't tell you not to go. Or if I'm emphasizing the word not, I can't tell you not to go. Do you hear how the meaning of that sentence changes depending on what word I emphasize? That has to do with tempo. Volume could be anything from a scream to a whisper, and again, depending on the appropriateness of the situation, competent communication is effective and appropriate, and your tempo, rate, and volume will change depending on the scenario. Pitch is whether or not you speak really high or really low. An example of pitch could be if you're really upset, you might have a shrill voice, and if you're really somber and depressed, your pitch could be much, much lower. If you have an accent, it can also change the way words are perceived. Sometimes we don't consider ourselves as having an accent, especially here in California, but if you travel to the East Coast or the Midwest, people will consider that you have an accent. So how people pronounce words in these areas changes the way that they're perceived. Next we have proxemics, which is probably the most entertaining category of nonverbal communication. Proxemics has to do with proximity. This has to do with the spatial distance between you and other people. When I say spatial, I don't mean spatial as in outer space, I mean spatial as in distance. There are 4 different proxemic zones, so please make a note that there are 4 different proxemic zones, which you may be tested on. So proxemics has to do with the space between you and another person's body. It does change with your connection to another person. If you really trust someone, or if you're in a familial or romantic relationship, you probably won't have so much personal space. If you don't know someone and you don't trust them, you're probably going to be a bit farther away. The thing to know about proxemics, again, is that this is your personal space bubble, and your bubble does change based off where you are and the circumstances that you're in. People normally have a 3-foot bubble, but that all changed once the coronavirus hit. I'm sure you all know what our personal bubble now. It's 6 feet. If anyone got within that bubble, some people got really upset. My personal space is relevant to whoever is trying to invade it. Sometimes I'm more comfortable with people than I am with others. Our intimate space is about 18 inches from our flesh. If you're within 18 inches to that 3-foot area, then they're probably in your intimate space. It's often someone that you're much more comfortable with. Our personal space ranges from 18 inches to maybe 4 feet. And again, this is in that personal bubble area. It's that zone beyond another person's reach. So if someone's in an arm's reach from you, but they can't touch you, that's your personal distance. Your social space can be anywhere from 4 feet to 12 feet. And this is a comfortable communication range for business meetings or education or work. Any place where you can communicate comfortably without yelling at someone and have that quality conversation or interpersonal exchange, but you don't have to be within that personal distance. This is a good working distance. And your public distance is usually what teachers have in the classroom. This is that 12-foot or more rule. When teachers are giving a lecture or you go to a concert, you have that public distance. There's a very clear separation of people in a certain group. Our book also talks about barrier behaviors, which are strategies designed to create a barrier between yourself and other people. These happen when people invade your personal space. Sometimes you might step back, you might put your hand up or engage in more antisocial verbal or nonverbal behavior. If I step back, often I feel uncomfortable and I start to remove myself from the situation. Other people have different ways to react. We all have our different defense mechanisms. Then we get into territory, which is a stationary area that we claim. Some of us are very cluttery, some of us are minimalists. These can be things like desk spaces, a favorite or assigned chair, your favorite parking spot, maybe even your own bedroom. People consider their territory to be something that other people shouldn't mess with. If you have your own bedroom, This might be a place where other people are not allowed to enter unless they have your permission. Maybe it's your desk or something you don't want people messing with. Maybe you have a place that you always park and you're really frustrated if someone is in your spot, whether even it's assigned or not. It's always where you end up. This is part of your territory. Your textbook also talks about people who go to a library to study, and sometimes they'll set a bag or put a chair next to them and spread their books out everywhere, or they might choose a corner spot if they don't want to be bothered. This is a way of staking your territory and showing that you are sticking around for a while and you don't want to be bothered. This is you setting up your own physical bubble, so to speak. Chronemics is a study of how humans use and structure time. How people use time depends greatly on their culture. Certain cultures are monochronic, and they emphasize punctuality, schedules, and the completing of one task before the next. So if you know anyone who has to finish something before they start something else, this would be a monochronic personality. Whereas other cultures are polychronic, and they have more flexible schedules and pursue multiple tasks at the same time. I'm sure many of us are both of these things. For example, I really like punctuality and schedule, but I'm also a multitasker. I don't necessarily like things upsetting my day, but I'm always working on multiple tasks at the same time. How we manage our time is important to nonverbal communication because it has a lot to do with how we perceive others. If you have someone who has a monochronic personality and they emphasize punctuality, and other people are late for a meeting, they may consider that to be disrespectful. Whereas other people may just have more of a flexible personality. So this is just one example of how time can tie into how we perceive others in our nonverbal communication. Our textbook says that men and women who others view as attractive are rated as being more sensitive, kind, strong, sociable, and interesting. Physical attractiveness can also influence how we perceive one another. There are negative effects of beauty. They can be perceived as intimidating. Our textbook says that people who are incredibly attractive may not be hired for a job for this reason, and they also have the perception that it is difficult to maintain a relationship with someone who is extremely attractive. Attractiveness is just a way that people are falsely judged because someone who is not as beautiful probably has the same sensitivity, strength, kindness, and friendliness as someone who is incredibly gorgeous. In addition to our physical attractiveness, the clothes we wear also represent us. They can illustrate our economic status, our education or career level, even our moral character, what we're interested in, and even our specific profession or trade. Again, these are all presumptions. They are perceptions through other people's lenses. But people will judge you based on how you dress. I interviewed for a job once and was hired over this other person, and this other person was more qualified than me. I asked my colleague, why did they pick me over the other guy? And he said that one of the reasons is that when the other guy interviewed, he had a big old stain on his tie. He didn't shave or cut his hair. And he said he just looked like a big old mess. And I was thinking that's a pretty shallow reason to disqualify someone from getting a job. But if that's what people are paying attention to, then why risk it? Which is one of the reasons why I tend to overdress for interviews, because I can always dress down. I can take off a tie or my jacket if it's too much, but I can't do that in a t-shirt and jeans. I can't dress up. I can dress down though. I think it also shows that you respect the other person and you want to be taken seriously as a professional. So think about the nonverbal messages that you feel your clothes convey. Take a minute right now just to look at what it is you're wearing. For example, right now, I'm at home right now wearing my workout clothes, but I don't wear my workout clothes when I'm teaching my courses. But right now we're in quarantine and no one can see me, so who cares? We're going to skip these two TED Talks for now and go right to the last slide here, which is artifactual communication. Artifactual communication has to do with any item that we put on ourselves to represent who we are. That's a little bit ambiguous, so I want to make this clearer. If you were to see my phone right now, you would see that I have an iPhone 8 Plus, and that tells you something about me. It has a pretty long battery life. I'm pretty busy, and I don't have the time to keep charging my phone. If you also look at it, you see it has a protective case on it, and that'll probably tell you that I drop it a lot. So that tells you a little bit about who I am. If you were to see my car keys right now, you would see that I have a tracker on it because I'm notorious for losing my car keys. Maybe you have something on your keychain Maybe it's a grocery store tag. So this is probably the most interesting category of nonverbal communication because artifacts are powerful, because this is how you communicate who you are. If you dye your hair, that tells me something about you. If you shower, that also tells me something about you. If you wear sweats, or if you wear name brands, if you have $2,500 shoes or a Louis Vuitton purse, that all tells me something about you. It's one of the reasons why people get tattoos, because this is how people represent and express themselves, right? This tells you something. These are artifacts, and artifacts are historical items that represent a culture or a community. Artifactual communication is basically the same thing. It's a thing that represents yourself based on the items that you use. So this could be something as simple as how you style your hair. Do you wear it short or are you clean cut? Do you have a beard? Wear V-necks? So there is a lot there, and there isn't so much if you pay attention to it. We can be inaccurate with our observations, so don't read into someone's nonverbals and think that you have them completely figured out, because you might not. You might have to have a little bit of modesty when you evaluate people. Here are the learning objectives for Chapter 6. Please take some time to review this material. Please reach out if you have any questions. You have a great day.